The first thing I remember wasn't falling. It was the silence after everyone realized I wasn't coming back up on my own. You'd think that hanging more than 200 feet above a construction site with nothing but a twisted safety line cutting into your ribs would make people panic. But it didn't. They just stared. Some looked away. A few pretended to check their radios. And one man, the guy who was supposed to be responsible for every worker on that site, actually folded his clipboard under his arm like he was waiting for a coffee break, instead of deciding whether I lived or died. My name is Mason Reed, and before that Tuesday morning, I believed hard work solved almost everything. I was 24, 6 months into my first union job outside Pittsburgh, still trying to prove I belonged among guys who had been walking steel longer than I'd been driving. My dad spent 30 years repairing railroad bridges. My mom waited tables until her knees gave out, and neither of them ever handed me anything except one lesson that stuck with me. If you show up early, keep your mouth shut, and work harder than everyone else, people will eventually notice. Turns out, people notice different things. Some notice effort. Others only notice paperwork. That morning started like every other. Gray sky, cold wind coming off the river, coffee that tasted burnt because someone had left the pot on too long, and a crew of tired men making the same jokes we'd already heard 100 times. I remember one of the older welders, Rick, nudging my shoulder and saying, "Kid, if you survive your first winter up here, you'll survive anything." I laughed. I wish I hadn't. Around 9 o'clock, we were setting a massive beam into position. Nothing unusual. I'd rehearsed the sequence in my head a dozen times. Hook in, step across, secure the line, signal the operator. Slow and steady. The kind of routine that becomes dangerous only because it feels routine. Then my right boot landed on a patch of wet steel that nobody saw. It slid just enough to steal my balance. My left hand missed the cable by inches. My stomach dropped before the rest of me did. The harness caught me so violently I thought my spine had snapped. Every ounce of air exploded out of my chest. And suddenly, I wasn't standing anymore. I was swinging over empty space with nothing beneath me except 200 feet of cold air and unfinished concrete. I screamed because anyone would. I don't care how tough somebody claims to be. When your feet aren't touching anything and gravity keeps reminding you who's really in charge, you scream. My gloves were already slipping. The harness dug deeper into my ribs every second. Blood rushed into my fingers until they started going numb. I looked up, trying to climb back toward the beam, but the safety line had wrapped itself around a twisted section of steel. I was stuck halfway between the beam and the ground, dangling like a broken tool someone forgot to put away. "Help!" I yelled. "Please, somebody help me." Faces appeared along the beam. I saw helmets leaning over the edge. I saw mouths moving. Then I heard the voice that still makes my blood boil all these years later. "Nobody moves." That was Brandon Cole, our site supervisor. He wasn't a monster in the movie sense. He didn't yell because he enjoyed it. He yelled because everything in his world revolved around liability reports, inspection scores, insurance audits, and keeping his spotless safety record alive. Workers weren't people to him. We were numbers that either helped or hurt his monthly reports. "Rescue's already been called," he shouted. 45 minutes out. Nobody leaves position. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 45 minutes, I shouted back. I can't hold on that long. He didn't even look up at me. "Then stop wasting energy yelling." Some of the crew shifted uncomfortably. Rick argued. Another guy named Luis took one step toward me before Brandon barked. "If anybody climbs out there without authorization, you're fired before your boots hit the ground." Just like that. Everyone froze. Not because they didn't care, because mortgages don't disappear. Kids still need braces. Truck payments still show up. Fear is expensive, and Brandon knew exactly how to spend it. My shoulders burned. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even feel the cable anymore. I started thinking about stupid things. My mother's chicken soup, the old fishing rod sitting in my garage, the voicemail from my little sister that I hadn't returned because I figured I'd call her after work. Funny what your brain reaches for when it thinks the story's almost over. Then, through all the shouting below, another voice came across the radio. Calm, quiet, almost bored. "Kid, look left." I blinked. "What?" "Left. About 3 feet." I turned my head. The giant crane above us began moving so slowly it barely made a sound. Every person on the site looked up. Hanging beneath the hook wasn't another beam. It wasn't equipment. It was an old silver lunchbox swinging gently toward me. "Easy," the voice said. "Open it. Water first." I stared at the lunchbox like I'd lost my mind. Inside sat a bottle of water, half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and a heavy work jacket folded as neatly as if someone had packed it that morning for themselves. Brandon exploded over the radio. Who authorized that crane movement? Put that boom back right now. The calm voice answered before I even unscrewed the water bottle. He's not cargo. A pause. He's a man. Brandon's voice turned sharp enough to cut steel. I'll end your career today. The stranger answered without raising his voice. Do it after he's standing on the ground, sitting there, suspended between the sky and the earth. I realized something I never forgot. The only person treating me like I mattered was someone I couldn't even see. I wish I could tell you that once the lunchbox reached me, everything suddenly felt safe. But that's not how fear works. Fear doesn't disappear because somebody says the right thing. It just gets quieter for a while, long enough for hope to sneak back in. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the bottle of water when I twisted the cap off. I remember laughing for half a second because it felt ridiculous. Here I was hanging over 200 feet of open air, and some stranger had just delivered lunch like the world's most terrifying room service. Drink slow, the voice said over the radio. Too fast, and you'll throw it back up. I listened without thinking. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he was sitting. Somehow, that calm voice had become the only thing keeping my mind from falling faster than my body ever could. I took a few careful sips, and almost immediately I realized how dehydrated I already was. The cold had fooled me into thinking I wasn't losing water, but panic drains a person in ways nobody tells you about. My breathing slowed just enough that I could actually think again. Good, the voice said. Now eat half the sandwich. Save the rest. I laughed again, this time a little harder. You're making lunch plans. You're going to need your strength later. How do you know? There was a pause. Because I'm not planning on explaining to my daughter why I let somebody die today. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else he said, not because it sounded heroic. It didn't. It sounded ordinary, like a father thinking about going home after work, like a man whose biggest concern before all this was probably whether he needed to stop at the grocery store on the way home. Somehow that made it more powerful. Down below, Brandon hadn't stopped yelling. Every few minutes he screamed another order into his radio, demanding the crane operator return the boom to its original position. You're interfering with an active rescue, he shouted. You're violating protocol, the voice answered every time with the exact same level tone. No, I'm keeping him alive until your protocol gets here. That only made Brandon angrier. He started threatening licenses, suspensions, lawsuits, everything he thought might scare the operator into backing down. Nothing worked. Whoever this man was, he had already decided what mattered. And once someone makes that decision, fear loses most of its leverage. Minutes dragged by like hours. The wind picked up, pushing me in slow circles beneath the beam. Every movement sent fresh pain through my shoulders. My fingers had gone completely numb. At one point I couldn't tell whether I was still gripping the cable or just imagining I was. Talk to me, the voice said. About what? Anything. I don't even know your name. Good. Then tell me yours. Mason. Nice to meet you. Mason. This is a weird way to meet somebody, he chuckled. It wasn't loud. Just enough to remind me another human being was sharing the moment with me. I'd had worse introductions. You always this calm? No. Another pause. I just learned a long time ago that panic spreads faster than confidence. I thought about that while staring at the clouds drifting overhead. How long have you been running cranes? Long enough to know steel usually tells you what it's about to do, if you're willing to listen. I wasn't. No, he replied gently. You were listening. The weather changed faster than the beam did. Sometimes bad luck doesn't need permission. That sentence hit harder than I expected. I'd already started blaming myself. Every rookie does. You replay every step until you're convinced you deserved whatever happened. Somehow a stranger I'd never met understood exactly where my mind had gone. Around 20 minutes in, the adrenaline started fading, and that's when things became dangerous. My arms felt like concrete. My lower back cramped so badly I thought I might black out. I stopped talking because it took too much energy. The voice noticed almost immediately. Mason. I didn't answer. Mason. Yeah? Tell me your favorite place you've ever been. I sighed. Seriously? Seriously. I closed my eyes. My grandfather had a cabin by a lake in northern Pennsylvania. No phone signal. Just old fishing boats and mosquitoes the size of helicopters. He laughed again. There we go. You? Little diner outside Wheeling. That's your favorite place? Best peach pie in 3 states. I couldn't help smiling. That's disappointing. Only because you've never had the pie. We kept talking like that for what felt like forever. Baseball, bad coffee, pickup trucks, whether dogs were smarter than cats. Completely meaningless conversations, except they weren't meaningless at all. Every second I spent arguing about pie was another second I wasn't thinking about letting go. Below us, the rescue crews finally arrived. I watched emergency vehicles roll onto the site with lights flashing. Firefighters began unloading ropes and rescue equipment while engineers argued over the safest approach. It should have made me feel better, but instead everything slowed down again. Rescue from that height isn't fast. Every move has to be checked twice, every anchor point inspected, every rope tested. Brandon immediately started talking to investigators, pointing at paperwork, gesturing toward equipment, making sure everyone understood he'd followed procedure. I remember thinking it was amazing how clean someone's boots could stay while another man hung above them fighting gravity. At one point, Rick looked straight up at me and mouthed, "Hang on." I nodded even though I wasn't sure I still could. My hands had become someone else's hands. They didn't belong to me anymore. Mason, yeah? Put the jacket on. I looked back inside the lunchbox. Now, you're colder than you realize. It took almost 5 minutes to wrestle that heavy work jacket over my harness without dropping it into the river below. When I finally managed, the warmth surprised me. It smelled like machine oil, fresh sawdust, and laundry detergent. Oddly comforting. Whoever owned it had probably worn it every day for years. "Fits you better than me," the voice joked. "I'm keeping it. Only if you promise to return it eventually. Deal." More time passed. Rescue crews climbed carefully toward me. I could finally see one firefighter making his way across the beam inch by inch. Every movement looked impossibly slow. My vision started tunneling around the edges. "Hey," the voice interrupted. "Stay with me. I'm trying." "Don't try. Just breathe." "I'm tired." "I know. I don't think my arms work anymore." "Then stop thinking about your arms." "That's easy for you to say." "No," he answered softly. "It's easy because I watched enough people survive impossible days to know they almost always quit in their heads before they quit with their bodies." That shut me up. Somewhere deep inside, I realized he wasn't just talking about that beam anymore. He was talking about life. About every impossible day people carry without anybody noticing. Finally, the rescue technician reached me. He clipped another line onto my harness and began checking every buckle with practiced hands. "You're okay," he kept repeating. "We've got you." But the strange thing is, the words didn't calm me nearly as much as the quiet voice overhead had. As they slowly transferred my weight onto the rescue system, I looked toward the crane cab for the first time. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds, reflecting off the window so brightly I couldn't see inside. Just a silhouette sitting high above everyone else. I lifted one shaking hand. "Hey," I shouted. "Don't leave yet." The silhouette didn't move. The rescue team lowered me inch by inch until my boots finally touched solid ground. The second they did, my legs gave out completely. Medics surrounded me. Someone wrapped me in blankets. Another checked my pulse while asking endless questions I barely heard. My eyes never stopped searching the top of that crane. "Where's the operator?" I asked. Nobody answered. I asked again while they loaded me into the ambulance. Rick looked uncomfortable. Lewis looked confused. Brandon pretended not to hear me at all. Before the ambulance doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the crane. The cab was empty. The operator had already climbed down, punched out for the day, and gone home. No speech. No applause, no handshake, just gone. 3 weeks later, after my shoulder surgeries and physical therapy began, the company released its official incident report. I sat at my kitchen table expecting to read about the man who had kept me alive for nearly 3 hours. Instead, I found pages filled with timelines, equipment numbers, weather reports, rescue procedures, and commendations for management's professional response. The crane operator's name wasn't there, not once. According to the report, I had survived because everyone followed protocol exactly as written. I read it twice, then a third time. By the end, I wasn't angry anymore. I was confused, because I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Paperwork had never lowered a lunchbox to save my life. For the first few weeks after the accident, everybody kept telling me the same thing. "Be grateful you're alive." I was. Believe me, I was. Every morning I woke up without another nightmare felt like a gift. Physical therapy hurt. My shoulder still clicked whenever I reached too high, and my left hand never quite got all its feeling back, but I was alive. Still, Every time someone called me lucky, I thought about that lunchbox. I thought about the jacket that still hung in my garage because I had no idea who to return it to. I thought about the calm voice that had somehow become louder in my memory than the screams on the construction site. Luck hadn't kept me alive. Someone had. And somehow, according to the official report, that someone didn't exist. I couldn't let that go. So I started asking questions. Rick remembered hearing the crane move before anyone gave permission. Lewis remembered somebody arguing with Brandon over the radio. One firefighter quietly admitted that by the time his team reached me, the operator had already stabilized my position enough to make the rescue possible. But nobody knew his name, or maybe they did and simply weren't willing to say it out loud. Eventually, I stopped asking people and started asking machines. A friend in the maintenance department helped me pull archived crane operation logs. Every movement of that boom had been recorded down to the second. Then I requested security footage from 3 different cameras overlooking the steel yard. It took days to match the timestamps. But when everything finally lined up, there it was. The crane began moving exactly 23 seconds after Brandon ordered everyone to stand down. The operator had knowingly ignored a direct order. Frame by frame, I watched that lunchbox swing through the air again. I watched the jacket disappear from the cab. I watched the crane remain perfectly steady for nearly 3 hours despite shifting winds that would have challenged operators with twice the experience. Then another camera caught him climbing down after the ambulance left. Middle-aged, gray beard, worn work boots, quiet eyes. He punched his time card, climbed into an old blue pickup with faded paint, and drove away like it had been the most ordinary Tuesday of his life. His employee file identified him as Nathan Calloway, 28 years operating heavy cranes, 0 safety violations, no management position, no awards, just a dependable man who showed up before sunrise every day and usually left without anyone noticing. I carried every piece of evidence into company headquarters the following Monday. At first, the executives looked irritated that a recovering rookie wanted another meeting. Then they watched the video. Nobody spoke for nearly a full minute after it ended. One director finally leaned back and whispered, "This report doesn't match what we just saw." "No," I answered. "It doesn't." Internal investigators reopened the case. Interviews were repeated. Radio recordings were reviewed. The original report unraveled faster than anyone expected. Brandon hadn't simply forgotten to mention Nathan. He had deliberately removed every reference to the crane operator because admitting someone ignored his orders would expose how badly he'd mismanaged the emergency. Preserving his reputation had mattered more than acknowledging the man who kept another employee alive. 2 months later, every machine on that job site shut down for an all-hands meeting. Nobody knew exactly why. Hundreds of workers gathered between unfinished steel columns while company leadership stood on a temporary platform. Brandon looked unusually confident at first. Then the director unfolded a new report. The previous investigation, he began, failed to recognize the actions of one employee whose decisions directly contributed to saving a coworker's life. That failure ends today. You could have heard a welding spark hit the concrete. The director continued. Interpreting means telling the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. Nathan Calloway chose a human life over personal consequences. This company should have honored that decision from the beginning. Brandon's face drained of color. For the first time since my accident, he looked like a man who understood what accountability actually felt like. Then someone called Nathan's name. He walked out from the crowd looking genuinely confused, still wearing the same faded work jacket, except I happened to be carrying it first. I met him at the base of the crane where everything had started. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Finally, I handed him the folded jacket. "I think this belongs to you." He smiled a little. "Looks like you kept your promise." I laughed. "You remember that?" "I remember most things that happened 200 feet in the air." My voice caught before I could say the next sentence. "You gave me your lunch." He shrugged. "I wasn't that hungry." "You gave me your water." Another shrug. "There's more water." "You stayed in that cab for 3 hours knowing you might lose your job." This time he looked down at the concrete before answering. "Jobs can be replaced." He looked back up at me. "People can't." I don't mind admitting that my eyes filled with tears right there in front of half the company. I wrapped my arms around him as carefully as my shoulder would allow. Nobody clapped at first. They just stood there quietly because every single person understood they were watching something bigger than an award ceremony. They were watching the truth finally catch up with the man who deserved it. Nathan received the company's highest civilian safety honor that afternoon. Brandon resigned before the month was over. Some people say he was forced out. Others insist he chose to leave. Honestly, I don't know which version is true anymore, and maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that the official record now tells the same story my heart has always remembered. Years have passed since that day, but every once in a while Nathan and I still meet at a little roadside diner halfway between our towns. He still orders peach pie. He still insists it's the best in 3 states. I still tell him he's wrong just to watch him grin. Sometimes people at nearby tables recognize us from an article or an interview and call him a hero. Every single time, he gets uncomfortable and changes the subject. That's probably why I believe he deserves the title more than anyone I've ever met. Real heroes rarely spend time convincing you they're heroes. They simply do the right thing when nobody's watching. And if history forgets them, they quietly go home for dinner anyway. But here's the question I want to leave with all of you. If you had been standing on that beam, would you have followed the rules exactly as written, or would you have risked everything to save one life? And if you had been Nathan, knowing your career might end before sunset, would you still have moved that crane? I'd really like to hear what you think, because situations like this aren't always black and white. Leave your opinion down in the comments. Do you believe Brandon deserved a second chance, or do you think what he did was unforgivable? If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who still believes quiet acts of courage deserve to be remembered. And if you enjoy true stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose names almost disappeared forever.